Jonas was already late, which in his life was practically a superpower, when the hover scooter beneath him began to emit a suspiciously human-like wheeze, as if it too had noticed his chronic bad timing. The spaceport of Terran IV spun beneath him like a carnival ride gone slightly rogue, stalls wobbling in low gravity, merchants shouting in a dozen languages that humans apparently couldn't pronounce without sounding like a dying star, and droids skating past on magnetic wheels, occasionally colliding with traders' crates of exotic fruits. Jonas tried to remember if he had tightened the left thruster before leaving his apartment, but the thought of checking made his stomach flip. A banana-shaped energy bar slipped from his pocket and floated past his head like a tiny, rebellious comet. He ducked, grabbed it, and muttered something that sounded remarkably like a curse in 3 different languages. He was wobbling, hovering, and generally in a state of low-level chaos when he first saw her. Lyra. She was gliding down the concourse like she had been born in the low gravity of Tehran, though her feet, or rather the graceful points where humans had toes, barely seemed to touch the platform. Jonah's first thought, as a scientist who usually preferred equations to people, was that she might be some optical illusion created by the lights reflecting off the hover crates. But when her long, iridescent ears twitched, perfectly attuned to the murmurs of the crowd, he realized she was real, and that reality was about to complicate his life in ways he wasn't sure his coffee-stained shirt could handle. She stopped beside a stall of sizzling protein pods, peering at the vendor as if she had invented bargaining itself. Jonas tried to look inconspicuous, which, in low gravity while gripping a wobbling scooter, is a paradoxical endeavor, but his scooter had other ideas. It veered sharply, nearly colliding with a crate labeled Live Starshrimp, "Do not panic if they sing." Jonas panicked anyway. Lyra glanced over at him, and for a heartbeat, everything else, the spaceport, the shouting merchants, the floating bananas, disappeared. She tilted her head, a smile teasing the corners of her iridescent lips, and said the words that made Jonah's heart do an entirely unscientific flip. "No human wants to marry an alien girl. What about you?" He choked on air, literally, and then, in a spectacular display of human awkwardness, he accidentally hit the emergency thruster. His scooter shot upward, narrowly missing a group of hover carts stacked with shimmering fruits that glowed like miniature suns. The merchants yelled, but Lyra laughed, a sound that was somehow both melodic and full of mischief, making Jonas forget to apologize, even as he spun in a half-circle trying to regain control. Somehow, gravity, momentum, and sheer panic aligned just enough that he landed, mostly upright, beside her. His energy bar, still floating, bounced off her shoulder. She caught it midair with the elegance of a cat and handed it back, her long ears twitching in amusement. "Clumsy, are we?" she asked. Jonas tried to come up with a witty retort, but all he managed was, practice falling gracefully." Lyra's eyes sparkled like fragments of distant nebulae as she studied him. Jonas felt simultaneously like a cosmic failure and the hero of some badly written interstellar comedy. She gestured to the scooter. "You're lucky you didn't knock over a live starshrimp colony," she said, lowering her voice in a conspiratorial whisper. "They sing when they're offended, and trust me, it's worse than any human karaoke." Jonas couldn't help but laugh despite the lingering panic and the burning coffee stain on his sleeve. He imagined a chorus of tiny, indignant starshrimp, and the absurdity of it lightened the tension gripping his chest. "So," Lyra said, tilting her head, her ears flicking with subtle impatience, or maybe curiosity, "do you always crash into the lives of strangers in such a spectacular way?" Jonas, blushing under the alien glow of her gaze, mumbled something about being an engineer, which was both true and only half-explanatory. Lyra's laughter, gentle and teasing, echoed across the concourse. She leaned closer, and Jonas could see the faint shimmer of her iridescent skin, the way her hair shifted colors from violet to silver depending on the angle of the lights. "Engineers, eh?" she said, quirking an eyebrow, or at least the closest alien approximation. "You fix things, but can you fix this?" Jonas blinked, unsure if she meant the scooter himself or some cosmic riddle he wasn't equipped to solve. The hover scooter, sensing perhaps that the situation had grown complicated, coughed once, sputtered, and then, completely out of nowhere, vomited a stream of holographic sparks that spelled help in midair before collapsing entirely. Jonas groaned. Lyra's ears twitched in delight. "I'd say you're off to a stellar start," she said. Come with me, there's something you need to see, something unusual. Jonas hesitated, looking at the chaos around them, the floating fruit, the half-panicked merchants, the star shrimp in cages still humming faintly, and then at her, whose smile now carried the weight of adventure and the faint threat of interstellar trouble. He followed, scooting awkwardly behind her, occasionally tripping over his own feet in low gravity, occasionally wishing that he had been born in some less chaotic corner of the galaxy. Lyra led him past bizarre market stalls, glowing liquids that smelled faintly of ozone and chocolate, robotic pets that barked in three-part harmonies, and a particularly surly droid that muttered existential complaints at passing shoppers. Spaceport life, she said, is what humans call organized chaos, except the chaos is winning most of the time. Jonas chuckled, nearly running into a floating crate of what looked like sentient melons. She stopped in front of a sleek shuttle, polished metal reflecting the neon of the spaceport lights. Jonah's stomach did the low-gravity equivalent of a somersault. "Boarding now," she said with a wink, "and try not to break the ship. Or yourself, bonus points if you manage both." Jonas swallowed. The question from earlier, the one that had sent his heart into overdrive, lingered, hovering between them like the faint hum of the shuttle's engines. Lyra's ears flicked again, impatient, amused, and serious all at once. Jonas realized that this was no ordinary encounter, no ordinary day at the spaceport, and certainly no ordinary woman. As they prepared to lift off, Jonas took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Well, I guess this is what counts as normal now." Lyra glanced at him, her smile widening, and said, "Good answer. But the real question is whether you can laugh at the galaxy, too." Jonas laughed, nervously, humbly, and with an inkling of excitement he hadn't felt since childhood, as the shuttle hummed beneath them and the spaceport shrank into the swirling lights of Terran IV. Somewhere, a starshrimp might have been singing in protest, but Jonas didn't care. He had an alien girl beside him, a chaotic universe ahead, and a question that refused to leave him alone. What did he want, really, when every law of human and cosmic society said he should? The shuttle jolted as it left the spaceport, the low-gravity thrusters squealing in protest like an old cat being forced into a bath. Jonas gripped the armrest so tightly he worried he might leave a fingerprint in the hull plating. Lyra floated effortlessly beside him, her long ears twitching, occasionally brushing the controls as if the ship obeyed her thoughts directly. Jonas stared at her in awe, attempting to calculate how many laws of physics she was bending with mere presence, and promptly failed. "You're sure this thing is safe?" he asked, trying to sound confident while hiding a hint of panic in his voice. Lyra tilted her head, a soft laugh spilling from her lips, and said, "Safe is relative. Fun is universal." Jonas swallowed and nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was agreeing to safety or fun or both. The shuttle lurched again, skimming past a field of asteroid debris, and Jonah's stomach performed the most impressive gymnastics of its life. Lyra reached over and flicked a switch, and the shuttle's hull shimmered with a protective energy shield, a faint glow enveloping them as space breeze tugged at their clothes. "See," she said, her eyes glinting with humor. "Physics isn't always scary, sometimes it's just dramatic." Jonas nodded, muttering under his breath about how dramatic it felt to be perched between a potential love story and certain humiliation in zero gravity. They entered an asteroid belt notorious for pirates who specialized in stealing badly secured hovercrafts, and Jonas realized this was likely the point in the story where human logic officially gave up. Lyra leaned back, legs crossed in midair, as if she spent her mornings dodging plasma cannons for fun. "So, Jonas," she said, voice smooth, teasing, "what's your experience with space anomalies?" Jonas blinked. I build coffee machines for ships. I fix engines, sort of." She raised an eyebrow, the one that twitched almost imperceptibly, and said, "Interesting skill set. I suppose engines are easier to negotiate with than pirate captains." Jonas chuckled, imagining arguing with a captain whose ears were twice the length of his torso. "They probably don't like coffee," he said, grinning weakly. Lyra laughed, a musical sound that made Jonas feel simultaneously ridiculous and alive. The shuttle's sensors beeped, and a holographic screen flickered to life in front of them, displaying a swirling nebula dotted with the jagged orbits of multiple moons. Jonah's mouth went dry. "Is that where we're going?" Lyra nodded, her long hair shifting from violet to silver as the light from the nebula danced across it. One of the outer moons. There's a supply I need to retrieve, and I need an assistant. You qualify barely, but I'll take what I can get. Jonas attempted to respond, but the words tangled in his throat. Why me? He finally asked. You could pick anyone, any alien with proper experience. Lyra's ears flicked again. Because, she said, leaning close enough that Jonas could see tiny sparks of light reflecting in her eyes, humans are unpredictable. You crash into things, you spill coffee, you panic spectacularly perfect qualities for surviving this mission. Jonas blinked. So you mean I'm good at failing? She smiled, nudging him lightly. Good at surviving failures, that's a skill most aliens don't have, trust me. They approached the moon, a jagged shard of rock orbiting a gas giant, its surface dotted with strange crystalline formations that pulsed faintly in rhythm with an invisible heartbeat. Jonas shivered, equal parts awe and fear. Is it dangerous? He asked. Absolutely, Lyra said cheerfully, and boring if it were. The shuttle bounced in the thin atmosphere, landing roughly on a crystalline plateau. Jonas stumbled, almost face-planting into a translucent shard, only to be caught by Lyra's long, graceful arm. You know, she said, falling gracefully is a learned art. You have potential. Jonas mumbled something that probably sounded like a thank you, and she laughed again, her ears quivering like delicate instruments. They navigated the plateau, jumping between floating fragments of crystal, avoiding energy pulses that fired randomly into the sky, and Jonas quickly realized he had underestimated how slippery these moon shards were in low gravity. He flailed, arms windmilling like a marionette, and collided with a shard that bounced him back into Lyra. Careful, she said, teasing, or I'll have to start rating your clumsiness. Jonas groaned but couldn't help laughing. Somehow, every near disaster was punctuated by her amusement, turning terror into an absurd dance across the alien terrain. Eventually, they reached a cave-like structure carved from a single enormous crystal, humming softly with energy. Inside, Lyra guided him to a small pedestal where a glowing orb floated, rotating slowly. The supply, she said, her tone suddenly serious, though a faint grin still tugged at her lips. Jonas stared at the orb. It's beautiful, he whispered. Lyra nodded. It powers half the settlements on the moons, dangerous in the wrong hands, and slightly opinionated. It hums when it likes your mood, growls when it doesn't. Jonas tilted his head. It judges people? She shrugged. It's a thing, welcome to my culture. Jonas laughed despite himself, imagining the orb as a tiny, cranky celestial cat. Jonas reached out and the orb seemed to pulse at his touch, glowing warmer. See, Lyra said, her long ears twitching in amusement. It likes you, probably because you're panicking less than most humans would, mostly. Jonas grinned, feeling a rush of confidence he hadn't experienced since he fixed his first malfunctioning engine back on Earth. Lyra leaned close, her ear brushing his arm, and said softly, You're surviving better than I expected. Jonas laughed nervously, mostly because of you. She smirked. Mostly because of you learning to keep up, that counts too. On the way back to the shuttle, Jonas stumbled again, knocking over a small pile of floating crystal fragments. One of them pinged against a wall, releasing a holographic projection of a tiny alien creature, which immediately began complaining in a squeaky voice about lost socks and poorly organized tunnels. Jonas froze. Lyra's laughter filled the cave, wrapping around him like gravity itself. You see, she said, pointing at the creature, the universe has a sense of humor, you fit right in. Jonas couldn't help but laugh too, realizing that amidst asteroid fields, energy-humming crystals, and argumentative holographic creatures, he had begun to feel alive, daring, and yes, strangely hopeful. Back in the shuttle, Lyra flicked switches, causing the engines to hum smoothly. Jonas looked at her, eyes wide. I think I'm going to survive this, he said, half serious, half joking. She smiled, ears flicking once more. You're doing better than survive, you're learning to enjoy it, that's the first step toward bigger questions. Jonas swallowed. Bigger questions? Yes, she said, leaning close, like what you really want and who you really want it with. But don't worry, we have time for that. She winked, and Jonas felt his chest flip again, caught between amusement, wonder, and a strange, nervous excitement. As the shuttle left the moon's orbit, stars streaking past like ribbons of light, Jonas realized he had survived crashing, dodging plasma pulses, and surviving an argumentative floating hologram. But most importantly, he had survived standing beside an alien woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about life, love, and the absurd humor of the universe. The shuttle's engines hummed in a soothing rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaos Jonas had endured on the moons of Tehran. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, exhausted but exhilarated, feeling the low gravity press against him like an awkward hug. Lyra floated beside him, her long ears twitching in amusement at his rumpled hair and slightly scorched uniform from a minor plasma mishap earlier. "You look like a human who just survived every poorly written sci-fi adventure ever," she teased. Jonas groaned, rubbing at his hair. "I was aiming for heroic, but apparently my panic with style is more realistic." Lyra laughed, the sound bouncing against the hull like music in zero gravity. "Realistic is good. Heroic is overrated. Anyway, you did survive. Mostly without breaking anything important, though the orb seems offended by your proximity." Jonas glanced at the glowing orb they had secured, resting safely in its containment unit. Its faint pulses now felt like the heartbeat of a tiny, sassy universe. "I think it's just judging me," he said. "I've been judged worse by engineers on Earth who thought my coffee machine designs were crimes against humanity." Lyra shook her head, ears flicking as if wagging. "This is different. The orb doesn't lie, it senses character. And right now it's amused. You're improving, Jonas, you're learning to be more than human expectations allow." Jonas laughed, half out of relief and half out of confusion. He had always measured himself by rules, by societal norms that seemed impossibly rigid, but here, floating among moons and glowing crystals, none of that mattered. They approached the orbit of the gas giant, the swirling clouds beneath them glowing in colors Jonas didn't have words for. "So," Lyra said, leaning casually against the console, "about that question from earlier, the one you've been dodging under stress, panic, and intermittent coffee spills." Jonas gulped, trying to recall if the shuttle had any emergency panic buttons he could press. Lyra raised an eyebrow, or the closest thing she had to one. "Do you remember asking if no human wanted to marry an alien girl?" Jonah's throat tightened. "Yes," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Lyra smiled faintly, ears quivering in amusement. "Well, I'd like to know your answer now, fully. No crashing scooters, no plasma emergencies, no arguing holograms, just you." Jonas took a deep breath. The galaxies stretched beyond the shuttle, infinite, chaotic, and beautiful. He thought of the moons they had jumped across, dodging plasma pulses and arguing with floating crystal projections, of the laughter that had filled the caves, of Lyra's teasing eyes that somehow made him feel simultaneously insignificant and monumental. He realized he had changed. He was braver than he thought, cleverer than he gave himself credit for, and capable of more than surviving awkward social encounters. The universe had forced him into chaos, and he had emerged laughing, learning, and willing to confront the impossible. He started, then paused, fumbling in the best human tradition. "I would marry you," he said finally. Lyra's ears flicked in a way that Jonas took as both approval and delight. "Really?" she asked, teasing him with a grin. "Yes," he confirmed, trying to sound confident despite the butterflies doing acrobatics in his stomach. "I mean, if I can survive spaceport disasters, asteroid belts, arguing holographic creatures, and your sense of humor, I can survive this." Lyra's laugh, light and melodic, filled the shuttle like starlight. "Bold words for a human," she said, "but I like bold." She reached over, brushing her ear lightly against his arm, a gesture that in her culture meant more than words ever could. Jonas shivered in the best possible way, a mix of awe, affection, and relief. Their journey back to Tehran IV was smoother, though not without incidents. Jonas accidentally pressed the snack dispensing button too often, launching floating energy bars that ricocheted across the cabin. Lyra laughed, deftly catching some midair while muttering, "Humans and their need to feed chaos." Jonas grinned, realizing that part of love might just be laughing at disasters together, however small or cosmic. "I think," he said, "we make a good team." Lyra tilted her head, ears twitching. "The best, clumsy, loud, unpredictable, perfect." Jonas laughed again, feeling the tension of months, maybe years of human conformity dissolve into pure, ridiculous joy. As they entered the spaceport's orbit, the familiar chaos of merchants, droids, and starshrimp echoed beneath them. Jonas braced himself, expecting judgment, ridicule, or at least a few raised eyebrows from humans. Instead, he found that he didn't care. The universe was vast, absurd, and wildly unpredictable. What mattered wasn't what society said, but what he chose, what he laughed at, and who he chose to laugh with. Lyra caught his gaze, long ears quivering as if to confirm unspoken promises. He realized he didn't want to hide, didn't want to conform, didn't want to shrink from the impossible. He wanted to stand beside her, face absurdity, adventure, and cosmic judgment, and still laugh. The shuttle landed smoothly, a minor miracle according to Jonas, and they disembarked amidst a mild chaos of floating cargo and bemused merchants. Lyra turned to him, voice teasing yet warm. "So, what now? Will you face the humans' opinions?" Jonas looked at the crowd, then back at her. "We'll face them," he said with a grin, "and maybe we'll throw a few energy bars at them if they get too serious." Lyra laughed, ears flicking once more in amusement. "Good, I like humans with style and humor. You might just survive after all." Jonas realized he had changed completely. He had survived, laughed, and chosen. He had grown beyond fear of judgment, beyond the limits of human expectation, and into someone who could love boldly, humorously, and wildly. Lyra extended her hand, or rather the graceful equivalent